Hi everyone, thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Here, I love sharing stories, useful knowledge, and personal experiences that can hopefully bring value to your day. I truly appreciate your support, so if you enjoy the content, consider subscribing and being part of this growing community.
I need to check the use names file and then write the story. The names to avoid are James Calloway, Owen, Diane, Garrett, Nathan, Ray, Carol, Vivian, Marcus, Lily, Tyler, Claire, Sophie, Derek, Patrice, Mark, Sandra, Pete, Corinne, Conrad, Walter, Brenda, Fern, Audrey, Biscuit, Dr. Okafor. Now I'll write the story with all new names and apply the analyzed formula. The day my daughter called me a coward in front of my own mother, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just set down my fork, wiped my mouth with a cloth napkin my wife had insisted we use at every dinner, even Tuesday dinners, even the ones where nobody had anything nice to say, and I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She was 22, home from her junior year of college on a weekend visit, wearing a sweater I'd paid for, sitting in a chair I'd bought, eating food I'd cooked, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, Mom's been miserable for years. You know that, right? She doesn't feel desired. She doesn't feel seen. That's on you." I remember thinking she actually rehearsed this. My wife, I'll call her Renee, was sitting at the other end of the table. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she was watching a play she already knew the ending to. My mother was there too. She'd driven up from Pensacola for the weekend, which she did maybe twice a year. She was 71, sharp as a tack, and I had always trusted her judgment on almost everything. She cleared her throat and said, "Ethan, I love you, but your family is falling apart and you need to face that." I looked at her. "Renee needs more than you've been giving her," my mother said. "She told me. She feels like she's living with a roommate. The marriage needs to open up or it's going to die." I sat there for a second. Open up. I'd heard that phrase before. Renee had floated it once, maybe 8 months earlier, framed as a thought experiment. I'd said no. I'd said it clearly and without anger, and I thought we'd move past it. Apparently what I thought was a conversation was actually the beginning of a campaign. And now my daughter and my mother were foot soldiers. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my mother. Then I looked at Renee, who was turning her wine glass slowly by the stem, not quite meeting my eyes. I stood up. I walked around the table and I kissed my daughter on the top of her head. She stiffened a little, not expecting that. I picked up my plate and took it to the kitchen. I heard my mother say, "Ethan, we're not finished," from the dining room, and I said, "I am." And I meant it in more ways than one. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I called my attorney. Let me back up, because you need to understand what kind of man I am before you can understand why what happened next happened. I'm 51 now. I grew up in Tallahassee, second of 3 boys. Father worked construction, mother taught elementary school. I put myself through 2 years of community college, transferred to Florida State, got a degree in civil engineering, and spent the next 25 years building a small but solid infrastructure consulting firm. At peak, we had 11 full-time employees and contracts across 4 states. I own the building the office is in. I own 2 rental duplexes in Gainesville. I own the house Renee and I have lived in for 16 years. I did not come from money. Everything I have, I built. I met Renee when I was 32. She was 30, working as a dental hygienist, and she was, I want to be honest about this, genuinely wonderful for a long time. Funny. Warm. She had this laugh that could fill a room. We got married after 2 years of dating, had our daughter Haley 3 years after that, and for maybe the first decade it was a genuinely good marriage. Somewhere in year 11 or 12 it started to shift. Renee quit her job, her choice. I supported it and spent more time at the gym. More time with a new circle of friends I didn't really know, less time with me. I noticed it, but I told myself it was a phase. She told me she was finding herself. I gave her room. What I didn't know until much, much later was that she had found someone else first. His name was Brandon. He was 38, divorced once, personal trainer at the gym she joined. She had been seeing him for almost a year before that dinner party where my world started to come apart. I didn't know any of that on the night of the dinner. I found out gradually, over the weeks that followed, like pulling a thread and watching a sweater unravel. The morning after I slept in the guest room, I called my attorney. His name is Phil, and he's been my business attorney for 9 years. He's not a divorce attorney, but he knew one, and he gave me a number and told me to call before I said or did anything else. I called. I had a meeting that afternoon. The divorce attorney. A woman named Catherine, mid-40s, seen everything twice, sat across from me and asked me to walk her through the financial picture. I walked her through it. By the time I was done, she had 3 legal pads full of notes and a look on her face that I recognized as professional concern. "Has your wife had access to the business accounts?" she asked. "She's on 2 of the personal accounts," I said. "Not the business." "Good. I want you to do something for me tonight. Don't move any money. Don't close any accounts. Don't say anything to her about this meeting. Just go home, be normal, and let me do some research." I went home. I was normal. Renee made pasta. We watched a home renovation show she liked. She rubbed lotion on her hands before bed and said goodnight, and I said goodnight back, and I lay in the dark guest room and thought about a lot of things. I thought about Haley, who I loved more than anything, and who had just sat across a dinner table from me and called me inadequate in front of my own mother. I tried to remember if I had ever done anything to make her feel like she had to take her mother's side that completely. I couldn't think of anything. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I'd been so focused on working and building and providing that I had become invisible in my own house. I thought about my mother, who had driven 4 hours to deliver a verdict she'd clearly already reached. I wondered how long she'd been talking to Renee. I wondered what Renee had told her. I thought about the word roommate. I turned it over in my head. Was that what I had been? I didn't think so. But I knew what I'd been. I didn't think so. But I knew what I'd been. Tired. Consistent. Predictable. The man who handled things so that things didn't fall apart. Maybe that doesn't look like love from the outside. Maybe it doesn't feel like it from the inside either. But I also thought, a woman who feels unloved talks to her husband. She asks for more. She goes to therapy. She does not deploy her daughter and her mother-in-law at a Tuesday dinner to make the case for opening the marriage to a man who has been faithful for 19 years. That's not a cry for help. That's a strategy. Catherine called me 3 days later. "I need you to come in," she said, "and bring any financial statements you can access." I went in. She had found something. Through a contact she had who did forensic accounting, she pulled some threads on Renee's spending over the past 18 months. There was a pattern. Cash withdrawals, Venmo transfers to an account that traced back to a holding LLC, hotel charges in cities I hadn't traveled to with Renee. The LLC traced back to Brandon. So my wife had been funneling money to her personal trainer boyfriend for the better part of 2 years. Not enormous sums, maybe $35,000 total, but real money. Money from the joint account where my direct deposits landed. I sat in Catherine's office with that information and I felt, strangely, very calm. Not numb. Calm. Like a room after a storm passes and the air is suddenly very still and you can see exactly what the damage is. "What do you want to do?" Catherine asked me. "I want to do this correctly," I said. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Here is what doing it correctly looked like. First, I had my accountant pull together a complete picture of marital assets versus my separate property. The rental duplexes I had bought before the marriage, the building the office was in, also pre-marriage, though I paid the mortgage with business revenue since. Catherine walked me through what was likely protected and what was likely in play. Second, I quietly moved the business operating accounts to new accounts Renee was not on, which was legal because she had never been on them to begin with. I just added a layer of protection. Third, I had a conversation with my business partner, a guy named Hugo who'd been with me for 12 years, and told him what was happening. I needed him to know in case things got ugly. Hugo said, "I had a feeling something was off," and didn't push for more. Fourth, I called Haley. This was the hardest one. I didn't call her to punish her or to make her feel guilty. I called her because she was my daughter and I loved her, and I was not going to let a divorce erase that, regardless of what role she'd been handed at that dinner. I told her I wanted to have coffee with her, just the 2 of us, before things got complicated. She sounded nervous, but she said yes. We met at a diner near her campus. I got there first. When she came in and sat down, she looked like she was bracing for an argument. I said, "I'm not angry with you." She looked at the table. "I think you said what you said because you love your mother and you thought you were helping her," I said. "I understand that, but I need you to know that what happens between your mother and me is more complicated than what she's told you. And I'm asking you, not demanding, asking, to reserve judgment until you know more." Haley looked up. Her eyes were wet. She said, "Dad, she told me she's been unhappy for years." "I believe that," I said. "I'm not asking you to believe she's lying about that. I'm asking you to understand that her unhappiness and the reasons for it are not the complete picture." She didn't say anything. "I'm going to be okay," I said. "And I need you to know that no matter what happens, you are not the reason for any of it, and you are not going to lose your father. Okay?" She reached across the table and took my hand and cried quietly for a minute or two. I let her. I held her hand. That was probably the most important thing I did through all of this. I filed for divorce on a Thursday morning. I had given Catherine everything she needed. She had documented the financial transfers, the hotel records, enough to establish fault in a state that still recognized it. Florida does not guarantee alimony, and while it can be a factor, Catherine's view was that the documented dissipation of marital assets, the $35,000, gave us significant leverage. Renee was served on a Thursday afternoon while she was at the gym. I know because I was not home when it happened, by design. I was in the office at my desk working on a bid for a stormwater project in Sarasota. My phone started ringing at 4:17. Renee. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. Then a text. "Ethan, what is this? What are you doing? Call me right now." I finished reviewing the bid. Then there were calls from a number I didn't recognize, which I later found out was Brandon's phone. I did not answer that one either. Then, at 6:42, a call from my mother. I answered. She said, "Ethan, I just got off the phone with Renee. She's very upset. I think you need to slow down and think about what you're doing." I said, "Mom, did Renee tell you she's been sending money to the man she's been sleeping with for the past 2 years? Silence. "Did she tell you that?" I asked. More silence. Then, "Ethan, I want to tell you something," I said. "I love you. I'm not angry with you about the dinner. I know she got to you first, and I know you thought you were helping. But I need you to understand that the version of this marriage you were given is not the whole version." My mother said very quietly, "How long have you known?" "I didn't know until recently," I said. "But I suspected something was wrong for a long time. I just didn't know what shape it was." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry." That meant something to me. I won't pretend it didn't. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. Renee hired an attorney and contested almost everything at first. There was a phase where she tried to argue that the business appreciated in value during the marriage and that she was entitled to a portion. Catherine handled that efficiently. The business was founded and structured before the marriage, and while its value had grown, she had made no material contribution to it. The dissipation claim, the $35,000, put pressure on Renee that I don't think she expected. Her attorney eventually advised her to settle rather than have that aired in court. Renee agreed. She got the furniture she wanted. She got a cash settlement that was fair but not generous. She did not get alimony. She did not get any stake in the business or the rental properties. She moved into an apartment across town. I heard through Haley that Brandon had ended things with her sometime during the proceedings. Apparently, the situation got complicated when there was no longer a funded joint account to draw from. I did not feel good about that exactly, but I did not feel bad about it either. I felt neutral, which, after everything, was an enormous relief. Haley and I talked more during those 8 months than we had in years. She came to understand, over time, the fuller picture. I didn't push. I didn't ask her to take sides. I just told her the truth when she asked, and I was always available when she needed to talk. She struggled with it. Watching a parent you defended turn out to have been doing something she hadn't known about is genuinely disorienting, and I gave her room to feel that without making her feel guilty about the dinner. By the time the divorce was finalized, she and I had dinner together at least twice a month. She started calling me on Sundays again. Small things, but not small at all. My mother drove up from Pensacola and took me to lunch the week the papers were signed. We sat in a booth at a seafood place near my office, and she told me she was proud of me. She said she meant for how I handled all of it. The patience, the way I'd talked to Haley, the fact that I hadn't burned anything down even when I had every reason to. I told her I appreciated that. She also said, "I should have called you before I came to that dinner and got myself turned into a prop." She looked genuinely embarrassed. I said, "You got played by someone you trusted. That's not a character flaw." She reached over and patted my arm. Then she stole 2 of my shrimp and changed the subject to the condo she was thinking of buying, and that was fine. That was exactly fine. I want to say something about the rebuilding part because I think that's the part nobody really talks about. People talk about the dramatic confrontations, the lawyer meetings, the moment you get served. The mediation sessions. The day the papers are signed. Those are stories with shapes, with beginnings and ends, and they're easy to tell. Nobody really talks about the Tuesday night 8 months after the divorce, when you're standing in your kitchen alone eating cold rotisserie chicken out of the container, and you realize the silence isn't painful anymore. It's just quiet. And quiet is okay. Nobody talks about how you start noticing things you forgot you liked. The way you can leave a book open on the coffee table, and it's still there when you come back. The way you can watch whatever you want on a Friday night without negotiating. The way the house starts to feel like yours again, after years of feeling like a thing you maintained for other people. I went back to therapy. I'd gone briefly in my 30s and hadn't kept it up. This time I stayed with it. My therapist is a guy named Dr. Vance who has the personality of a very patient librarian, which is exactly what I needed. He helped me understand why I had stayed in a marriage that had been going wrong for years without really pushing to fix it, and why I had interpreted providing as the same thing as loving, when maybe they weren't always the same. I'm not going to pretend that wasn't uncomfortable to sit with, but I sat with it. About 14 months after the divorce was finalized, I met someone. Her name is Joanna. She's 47, an environmental consultant, divorced about 4 years before I was. We met at a conference for contractors and consultants. She was presenting on EPA compliance. I was in the audience, and she said something during the Q&A that made me laugh out loud. She heard me from the stage and gave me a look. Afterward, I found her at the coffee station and apologized, and she said, "Don't apologize. You were the only person laughing in the right place." We had dinner that night. We talked for 4 hours. I drove home at midnight feeling a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I took it slow. I needed to take it slow, and she understood that, partly because she'd been through her own version of needing to take it slow. We dated for 6 months before I introduced her to Haley. Haley was nervous, and Joanna was patient with that, and eventually the two of them got to a place that I'd describe as genuinely warm. I'm not going to give you a storybook ending because life doesn't work like that. What I'll tell you is that I am, at 51, happier than I was at 40. That still surprises me sometimes. I expected to feel like a man who had lost a lot of things, and instead, I feel like a man who found out what he was actually made of. There's one more thing I should tell you, because it happened and it matters. About 6 weeks after Joanna and I made things official, I got a call from Renee. I hadn't spoken to her directly since a brief professional exchange during a mediation session. We communicated through Haley or through attorneys when necessary. I almost didn't answer. I answered. She was cordial, careful. She asked how I was. I said I was well. She said she was calling because she thought it was time for us to find a way to be civil for Haley's sake. I said I had no problem being civil. I hadn't been the one being uncivil. There was a pause. Then she said, "I made a lot of mistakes, Ethan. I know that. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of it." I thought about what to say for a moment. I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I genuinely do. But I don't think us being in regular contact serves either of us well. Haley's an adult. She can navigate her relationship with both of us on her own. I think we should let her do that." Renee said, quietly, "Okay." We said goodbye. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a minute, looking out the window at the backyard. The yard Haley used to run around in when she was 7, 8, 9 years old. The yard I mow every 2 weeks because I find it meditative, which is something I would never have admitted in my 30s. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt finished. And finished, I've learned, is a good thing. Finished means something is complete. It means it happened and it ended, and you came out the other side. And you're still standing, still working, still laughing when something is funny, still capable of driving home from a conference at midnight feeling something real. That's enough. Honestly, for a Tuesday, that's more than enough. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any grand philosophical way. Just the plain, quiet version of it that you arrive at when you've had enough time and enough therapy and enough cold rotisserie chicken eaten alone in a kitchen that finally feels like yours again. Here's what I know. Renee didn't wake up one day and decide to become someone who lied. It happened in small steps, each one made easier by the one before it. A small secret becomes a larger one. A rationalization becomes a habit, and the longer it goes unchallenged, the more the person doing it starts to believe they're justified, that the lying is a response to something rather than a choice. By the time she was sitting at that dinner table, letting my daughter and my mother make her case for her, I think she had genuinely convinced herself that I was the problem. That's what long-term dishonesty does to a person. It doesn't just damage the people around them, it warps their own sense of reality. And me. I have to be honest about my part too. I stayed in a marriage that had been cooling for years because I confused stability with love. I kept the lights on, paid the bills, showed up to the dinners. I told myself that was enough. Dr. Member, Vance helped me understand that providing and loving are not the same thing, and that I had been using one to avoid asking whether I was doing the other. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with. But sitting with uncomfortable things is exactly how you stop repeating them. What I'm most proud of, and I don't say that easily because I'm not a man who talks about being proud of himself, is that I didn't act out of anger. When I found out about the $35,000, when I learned about Brandon, when I replayed every casual lie Renee had told me over 2 years and felt them land all at once, I had every reason to explode. I didn't. I called an attorney. I made a plan. I talked to Haley before things got ugly, not to recruit her, but to make sure she knew she still had a father regardless of what happened next. That's what intelligence looks like in a crisis, I think. Not being unaffected. I was absolutely affected, but refusing to let the feeling be the whole response. You gather information, you protect what matters, you move deliberately, and you stay decent, not because decency is always rewarded, but because you have to live inside your own actions for the rest of your life. And a man who burns everything down in a rage has to carry that too. The resilience part came later. It came in the form of showing up to work the week after I was served with Renee's counterfiling and doing my job well. It came in the form of calling Haley on Sundays, even when the conversations were awkward. It came in the form of going back to therapy instead of just gritting through it. Resilience isn't dramatic. It's just the decision, made over and over again, to keep going in the right direction, even when the right direction is slow and unglamorous. I'm 51, and I'm okay. Joanna's reading in the next room right now, and the house is quiet, and I have work I'm proud of. And a daughter who calls me on Sundays. None of that fell from the sky. It came from choices, mine and other people's, and from what I decided to do with the hand I was dealt. That's the whole story, really. What you do with what you're given. That part is always up to you.